Okay, so we're continuing our demos and tutorials on the material design stepper component. And so what we're doing is we're zooming in on the material design documentation. It's at version 10.1. We're looking at the components, and we're zooming in on material design stepper. And now we're going to go and take a look at an example, and we're going to now take a look at the different states associated with the stepper and how to map icons to states. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is this example is a little bit more complex than it really should be, because we're showing two different steppers. But I think there's some good things to get out of both of these steppers, which I want to just describe to you. Okay, so if you look at the first stepper, basically what you have is the default step is step 1, and you can go there, and if you do not fill in the form, the state of this step is that it's step 1, and you can go edit it, and it's not complete if you don't enter it and validate the form, so it still shows a 1. Now if I go here and type in a name and I click next, notice now that I see a checkbox as opposed to an edit icon. Now in the previous examples that we looked at, the icon was an edit icon, which means, okay, I did type in the data, yes, it's required, the form was submitted, the form group does have the data, it's valid, but it should still show the icon as an edit icon, because I could go back there and change it. And that behavior is the default behavior. In this particular example, what we're doing is we're taking the stepper global options, and we're not using the default indicators. So we see a checkbox now. So if you get a little confused with that, that's what the issue is in the code, different than the other examples. So the icon is showing up a little bit differently, because what we're doing is we're not using the default icons, we're trying to use custom icons to override, and so we set the stepper global option to false, so we don't use the default icons and we can override them. So that's the difference there. So now that I filled out that information, I come here and I type in my address, and if I go to next, and notice the second step is complete, and I see the checkbox, the check icon now, and so it's a little bit different than the previous example. And now I'm at this stage, at this particular step here, and I could reset the form, or I could go back and modify. And click next, and then I could go and reset. So that's a simple example where I'm not really explicitly changing anything except one thing, and that is I'm not using the default indicators for the icons, and so there's a little bit of different behavior there, and we'll show you that in the code. And let's take a look at this one here very quickly. So here what happens is it says put down your phone, and when I click next, it goes to the checkbox. But when I come back to this one, it's now a different icon. So what's happening here is what I'm doing is I have different states associated with my step. There was the starting state, and then there was an activation state, and I'm seeing different icons. And if I continue, it now shows the completed state. In this particular situation, and now if I go back, notice the second state looks like it's been visited, but if I go to the second state, it says socialize with each other. I'm looking at a different icon. It's blue now, and there's this I think this is a forum icon. And if I click next, and then I come back here, so the bottom line is, as I go through the stepper, there's different states of these steps, and the state name is being mapped to this icon value, and so I see these different types of icons, and so that's called icon overriding. And then what I'm doing is overriding it in the code, and it's very easy to do that. Let's just quickly do one thing here, just to verify one more thing. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. We can actually render the front end while we're looking at the code here, because the dev server is starting, and we could actually see the code in real time. So there's only one really thing differently with this particular example, but let's go through a couple of things here to try to understand what's so different about this example. So if I look at the project, once again, you've got your files here, your Angular JSON, which describes your project workspace, your package JSON, which you used, describes all your installed packages, your TS TypeScript compiler configurations, your lint for code quality. And okay, so now we have our app rendering, so we could move forward looking at the code. So if you go to the Angular JSON file, once again, you've got an index.html, and you've got a main module. And so if we look at the source code directory, we look at the main module, and let's see if there's anything different here that pops out. Okay, so we're importing all these modules here. Nothing out of the ordinary. We have the HTTP client module using which is imported, the forms module, the reactive forms module. We have the demo material design module, and obviously there's other things here. So this is the main root component that we're importing, which we're using. Notice it down here, we're bootstrapping that in our module, and we do have our map form default options, and it's a token that's getting injected here. It's defining the appearance fill. Once again, we could change that to outline. Let's just do it and look at an outline field. All the fields in the forms turn to an outline view, and we have our app module here, which is our application. This is our Angular application, because our Angular.json file is saying the main.ts is the main app. This is the module that gets bootstrapped upon the application loading, and then on top of that we have this bootstrap root component, which is being used in the index.html file, and that's the one that defines and instantiates the root, the component hierarchy, the component tree hierarchy. And so it starts out at this root element, and the index.html, the markup, all this markup here is just governed by this particular custom tag. Okay, so let's zoom in on the code. The code is pretty straightforward. The the first stepper looks like it's using some forms, and there's a little difference here between this particular example and the previous examples. The one difference is that we're importing everything we need for the application, for the forms, the form groups, the validators, but we also import this stepper global options from the CDK stepper. Now, every stepper uses the CDK. The CDK stepper has the functionality, the base functionality, for all my horizontal and vertical steppers, for the forward and previous buttons, for the base functionality, for the steps, etc. So no surprise there. But the difference here is that when we provide this global, the stepper global options in my root component, what I'm doing is also defining the display default indicator type to be false. And that's why this thing, when I navigate, shows a checkbox, and it no longer shows that edit icon. So I just wanted to point that out because I was confused when I first saw this. Well, why was the checkbox showing up all of a sudden when it didn't show up in the previous examples? And so that's the only difference between the previous examples in the documentation. Once again, I do have my component. It's implementing an on init. My two form groups define the first stepper form, the second stepper form that's being used, and the ng on init function instantiates those using the form builder with the controls and the initial state and the validators, etc. And so when this application renders and this component renders, I've got state for my two mat steps, and I've got some initial settings for the stepper global options to perform a certain way. Now, we're going to now zoom in on this stepper because this is pretty straightforward. It really just finds, it's just pretty much the same functionality we looked at previously, except the default behavior of the icon once it's complete. So let's take a look at this particular stepper. So let's go to the template now, right? Because this particular component is pointing to a template and a style sheet. So here's the template, and the first mat stepper is here, and this was the first stepper, and this is the second one. So the second stepper is this code here. So let's take a look at this code. So we have a mat horizontal stepper here, and it does have the different steps, but there's some minor differences with this particular stepper. Now notice here, my mat step has a label attribute called step 1, and although I just changed the position of my label, it is different than what my previous steppers were doing. So let's take a look at the first stepper. The first stepper uses an ng template. An ng template basically says, with an attribute of mat step label, and here I'm saying, here's an ng template, here's my mat step label, here's my text, and yes, I could control the position of this thing, but it was a different way to specify the label. In my second stepper, what I'm doing is I'm just defining a label equal to step 1. Now, needless to say, I can still control the position of my step. So here, let me go to the second stepper, and let me put in, and let me see if I still have it pasted. Yeah, it's the label position bottom. So I can still control the position of my label. It's just that I use this simple attribute of the mat step to define the label. Now I could just as well ask myself, what happens if I do something very similar up here in the first stepper in the particular mat step. See what happens. It doesn't. The template seems to be taking the priority here, so it doesn't do anything. So let's forget about that. Just wanted to check that. Need to know what's going on there. Oh, okay. So let's focus on the second horizontal stepper here for a moment. Okay. So here. Here, the second horizontal stepper really doesn't do much. There's one step there with the mat label, step 1, and the content of that particular step is not a form. It's just some top content. Put down your phone. There is a button there with a mat button attribute and a mat stepper next function, which navigates me. This particular stepper has a next function and will bring me to the second step, which is the second step, which basically has the label step 2. But now notice here, I have a state that's called chat, and so if I back up and go to next, what you'll see is the state is called chat, and I'm seeing this icon. So what does that mean? And notice the first step has a state phone, and if I go back to the first step, that shows the phone icon. So the secret to success here is that you're overwriting the icons down here, and you're mapping the state to an icon. And so when I clicked on this mat step, I showed the phone icon. When I click on this mat step, I show this other icon, but it's mapping the state chat to the icon. So what I'm doing here, so basically what I do here is for each step I do define a state, and for each state I define an ng template, and I use the mat stepper icon attribute to define the map the state to the icon. So here I do a call end, and here I do a forum. Let's see what happens if I change this to chat. I would have to know what the icons are to really understand. So is that any different? Yes. Okay, so the bottom line is I could change my icons by mapping my steps and setting the state on my steps and mapping those states to the icons. So let's review. Let's review where we are with this. Okay, so the first thing we noticed is that we're defining this attribute in the code for the root component. We're defining token stepper global options to use a value called display default indicator type, and we set it to false. And that, as well as overriding the icons, helps us map, first of all, see these default states, these default icons change to a checkbox, and we also are capable of clicking on a step and changing the state of phone to map it to a different icon. And that's really all we did here was say, turn off the default icons. Let me control my own icons, and things show up a little bit differently. So we could take a look at this in greater detail, but I think it was a good demo to look at these two horizontal steppers and what the differences were, and how to vary these differences. So let's move on and take a look at some other attributes and characteristics of the material design stepper component.